Us to get started tonight, and really excited about this quarter and studying the book, mostly of First Samuel together, and we will work our way just briefly into Second Samuel and basically make it to the transition. Well, it's a major transition in David's life anyway, so we'll look at that in due time. I do want you just to notice very quickly on the schedule at the very end of the quarter, we will be looking at the book of Proverbs in kind of an overview way. So this is the quarter generally when we survey some piece of wisdom literature. So I think 2 quarters ago, if our records are accurate, I think 2 quarters ago, Lonnie did Job. I wasn't here for that. And then last quarter, I overviewed the book of Psalms. We kind of looked at each book of the Psalms and kind of the pattern that's there. And this time, we're going to try to do Proverbs. Basically, I think that we will probably do some type of theme survey of Proverbs, look at different ideas that are presented in the Proverbs. I'm not sold on that idea yet. We may do something a little different. But it might be profitable for you. There are 31 Proverbs, and there are, somewhere close to 30 days in a month. It might be profitable for you over the next little while to read a chapter of Proverbs a day or something like that, just to be ready for that. And I think that will be valuable for you anyway. I think there are lots of people who have created that habit. That's not something that I've done, but I think that would be a good habit for us. But also just kind of in anticipation of the fact that we're not going to get to look at every bit of the Proverbs. We're basically going to look at every chapter of 1st and 2nd Samuel. So you can read that in preparation for Bible class, which is kind of in view of the fact that in August we're going to be looking at the Proverbs for maybe 3 or 4 classes. Maybe that would be something worthwhile too. So let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 9, which is where we're ready to start tonight. And you are well aware that in the beginning of the book of 1 Samuel, we are really still in what we've called the Bible period of the Judges. That ends with Eli and Samuel, and in some ways Samuel's sons, though they never really inherit Samuel's title, even though they are kind of doing that work even while Samuel is still alive. But that's the period of the Judges. And in chapter 8, the people come and request what? A king. And what kind of king specifically? Like the nations around them. Now, that phrase, nations around them, I think could be a neutral phrase. And what I mean by that, in Deuteronomy 17, God says one day the people are going to ask for a king like the nations around them. Just in the same way that the kings around them have a king, they're going to want a king. Well, that's all right in some ways, because God says, I could have a king like that who would be godly, right? He could not store up weapons, and he could not multiply wives, and he could make a copy of the law, and he could not focus on building up treasure. But when they say they want a king like the nations around them, I don't think they mean in the same sense that, well, other nations have a king, we'd like one too. I think they mean one who is patterned after the kings of the other nations. One who will deliver them from their oppressions. One who will rescue them from the enemies that are around them. And the problem here, Samuel doesn't see the depth of the problem because he thinks it's his fault. He thinks they're rejecting him. But God says they're rejecting me. God says they're rejecting me, Yahweh, from being king over them. And Samuel will make that point. I love 1 Samuel 12. He says that you asked for a king when God was your king. And that's what they should have recognized.
That's one of the reasons why they didn't want a king like God.
Yeah.
Because they had to be righteous and
Yes.
obedient and do the right thing, where the other kings around was pagan and they did anything they pleased.
Yeah, I think you're right, was to have a king who could rescue them from their enemies so that they didn't have to go through that whole repentance process over and over again. Boy, that was really tedious to have to turn back to God. If we could just have a king that was head and shoulders above everybody else and could just rescue us, that would be super handy. So, in chapter 8, Samuel comes back to the people, and there's a key word, a key verb that the king is going to do? And what is that verb that the king will do? End of chapter 8. You remember? It's mentioned several times in that last paragraph. Let me look at my text here.
Basically, they're going to have to pay.
Yeah, take is the word I was looking for. So thank you for reading my mind. Somebody said take. I heard it. So take. And yes, they're going to have to give it up. That's right. That's their side of it. But take. He will take your sons. He will take your daughters. He will take your animals. He'll take your money. He's going to take. Unlike their king currently, who had given and given and given and given, he would be a taking king. So we come to the end of 1 Samuel 8 with the understanding that they're going to have a king, and God is going to be the one. So the people want a king, but they're going to leave it basically, I think, to God and to Samuel about who that king will be. And so the question is who will God choose? And it seems to me that he is going to choose a king like they requested. They are going to get a king that is like the kings that the nations have. And we'll see that as we go through. Anything you want to say as we jump into chapter 9?
I don't think so.
Anything else that you think we need to pick up on as we go in? So this is going to introduce us to this section of 1 Samuel, chapters 8 through 15. The king Israel wanted, the United Kingdom, and you might be able to anticipate that when we get to chapter 16, we'll have the king that God wanted. But that's not on the slide yet because we're nowhere close. So 1 Samuel chapter 9, and Alan, take us through as much of that as you'd like.
There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zeror, the son of Bechorath, the son of Apha, a Benjamite, a mighty man of power, and he had a choice, handsome son whose name was Saul. There was not a more handsome person than he among the children of Israel, for his shoulders were upward as he was taller than any of the people. And so here it mentions that what tribe is he from? He's from Benjamin. And what characteristics or qualities does it mention about him so far? He's tall and handsome. So very physically pleasing, right? And the people will be like, yes, that is our king. He looks like a king, and you could spot him in a crowd because he's above everybody. And so like Larson has been alluding to and saying, they don't care about God, and they don't care about things that he wants done. They want someone who can physically represent them and seems powerful and seems, I don't know, maybe majestic and as close as a human can be. And so they're focused on these physical things to be like the nations around them. Are there any other thoughts or comments just through the first two? We can carry on them. So now the donkeys of Kish, Saul's father, were lost. And Kish said to his son Saul, please take one of the servants with you and arise and go look for the donkeys. So he passed through the mountains of Ephraim and through the land of Shalisha, but they did not find them. Then they passed through the land of Shalem, and they were not there. Then he passed through the land of the Benjamites, but they did not find them. When they had come to the land of Zuph, Saul said to his servant who was with him, come, let us return, lest my father cease caring about the donkeys and become worried about us. So here he's just set out on like I guess you just say a mundane task, right? The donkeys have got out, they've wandered off. I need you to take a servant and go get them. So they're on this trip or mission to find them, and he can't find them anywhere. And it's been a long enough time that he's saying, Dad ain't going to care about the donkeys. We've been going so long, he's going to be worried there's something that's happened to us, that we need to turn around and go back. So we'll continue on here. And he says, and he said to him, look now, there is in this city a man of God, and he is an honorable man. All that he says surely comes to pass. So let us go there. Perhaps he can show us the way that we should go. Then Saul said to his servant, but look, if we go, what shall we bring the man? For the bread in our vessels is all gone, and there is no present to bring the man of God. What do we have? And the servant answered Saul again and said, look, I have here I have here at hand 1/4 of a shekel of silver. I will give that to the man of God to tell us our way. Formerly in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, he spoke thus, Come, let us go to the seer, for who is now called a prophet was formerly called a seer. Then Saul said to his servant, Well said, come, let us go. So they went to the city where the man of God was. So here, I think it's interesting that the servant knows that there's a man of God nearby that they can inquire of. It doesn't, the text doesn't tell us that Saul knew about him, and the fact that the servant explains he's a trustworthy person. Everything he says comes to pass. He's an honorable man. We can trust him. Whatever he says will happen. And I don't know what that says about Saul's character, that he didn't know that, and that the servant that's in the same household as Saul did. That's just something to mention here. But the text doesn't show one way or the other. It's just something to think about.
Verse 18 doesn't say that Saul goes up to Samuel and asks who it is.
Do what now?
Yeah.
Saul approached Samuel at the gate and asked, Would you please tell me where the seer is?
Yeah.
Well, he didn't know Saul.
Right.
But everybody knew Saul from Dan to Beersheba. Samuel.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that interesting? That says a lot to his character.
Yeah.
Saul, and why did he not know there was an offering going on that day? It's only 6 miles from where he lives to this place.
Mm-hmm.
Only 6 miles, he should know.
Yeah.
So apparently he speaks bounds to his character, that he's that close and he doesn't know who he is. And let's see. Any other thoughts or questions through verse 10 there? Larson, if you want to pick up in 11.
Yeah, so let's look at verse 11. They went up the hill to the city. They met young women coming out to draw water, and he said to them, "Is the seer here?" So this image of meeting women to come out to draw water, that's a familiar image in the Old Testament. We see it multiple times in the book of Genesis. We see it in Exodus with Moses, and there may be something to that. But he kind of, in general, meetings at wells end in weddings. This one doesn't, right? This meeting at a well ends in a anointing of a king. And one commentator maybe suggested that this is kind of an allusion to Saul being maybe in some ways married to Israel, right? That he's going to have a ceremony. It's just going to be a different kind of ceremony that's coming. But anyway, verse 12, they answered, "He is. Behold, he is just ahead of you. Hurry. He has come just now to the city because the people have a sacrifice today on the high place." Now, I think maybe our kind of antennae go up when we hear about somebody making a sacrifice on the high place. We say, wait a second, that's not a good idea. Sacrifices on the high places, those were absolutely forbidden. And you are right, but I think it would be once the temple had been constructed, the sacrifices on the high place were done away with. Deuteronomy chapter 12, I think, basically lays that out and says, there's coming a day when God will choose a place to put his name. And when he does that, you won't sacrifice all around the countryside like you're doing now. You will come to that place and bring your sacrifices there. And that was very helpful to me as a Bible student to see that, because all of a sudden in like 1st and 2nd Kings, the high places are these huge problems, and the kings aren't destroying them, and that's a bad commentary on their character. But here, Samuel is going around to these different high places. You'll remember that when he goes to anoint David in 1 Samuel 16, he says, I'm going to make a sacrifice there. And that would have been something, I think, that would have been non-suspicious. It would have been something not out of the ordinary, that Samuel would be going to another place to offer a sacrifice. But once the temple is constructed, that's where things will change. Now, as soon as you enter the city, these women say, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat, for the people will not eat till he comes, since he must bless the sacrifice. Afterward, those who are invited will eat. Now go up, for you will meet him immediately. So they went up to the city. As they were entering the city, they saw Samuel coming out toward them on his way up to the high place. I do want to note this. The people are waiting on Samuel for the sacrifice. They will not move ahead until Samuel gets there. Just put a pin in that. The people recognize that Samuel must bless the sacrifice before all of this moves forward in it, right? So that will be an issue with Saul in just a little while. Anything through verse 14 so far. This is just kind of just the fact so far. Now,
Just a question.
yeah, go ahead.
Since the temple is not built,
Yeah.
did they not still have the equipment to set up a tabernacle?
They did. Yeah, the tabernacle is set up. So I think because it was not, in some ways, it was not a permanent structure. Now, I say that with the recognition that the tabernacle stood almost as long as the temple stood, because the temple's destroyed pretty quickly after it's constructed. But I think, based on what we see with Samuel, that there was more local participation in sacrifices before the temple than after. Once the temple was constructed and God chose a specific place. See, there's not, even though the tabernacle's set up, there's not one place that it stays. It's at Shiloh for a while. I think it might be at Gilgal for a while. So because there was no permanent centralized location, these sacrifices, obviously I think they have God's approval here.
The movable tabernacle was with the Ark of the Covenant there.
It was, yes.
What it would actually, when the offerings was made for the sin offerings and stuff, it was actually sprinkled on by the high priest.
Yes.
But I don't get the part where if you wasn't there at the where it was at, if there was, even though they was doing offerings, that there was no forgiveness of sin unless it was offered on.
Well, there might be multiple things that we could say about that. One, we could say, I don't know, because that's probably the most clear answer. The second thing would be that I'm not necessarily, you may be right, that what we would consider sin offerings may not be in the picture here. We may be talking about like peace offerings or fellowship offerings or burnt offerings that would symbolize dedication or other types of offerings. Because, the blood does have to be splashed on the altar in certain places for some of those other ones. The only thing that I would say is that it looks like to me, from a combination of Deuteronomy 12 and all the passages where we see examples of, looks like pretty approved situations where they're offering sacrifices away from the temple, that there's something different going on, away from the tabernacle, that there's something different going on before the temple than after. Does that make sense? I don't know all the details of it.
And it could be because it was Samuel, and since Samuel and God was like this.
Yeah.
I don't think Samuel would have done something other that God hadn't give him an okay to do.
I agree with that. And for example, when David tries to stop the plague and they come to the threshing floor there, he builds an altar and makes a sacrifice, right? That's where the temple will be, right? But it's not where the tabernacle is, and he's making an offering. Now you might say, well, that's a different kind of offering. Yes, but after the temple is built, all those offering sites, ixnay, right? There's to be no more of those. And the most faithful of the kings eliminate even the high places where I think potentially there were offerings being made to Yahweh, but not legitimately, not rightly. They were supposed to be brought back to the centralized location. And Leviticus 17 actually gives us a little insight to that too. Maybe it raises more questions. It says, don't offer away from the centralized location so that you don't offer to the goat demons. Now, I don't know what goat demons are. I don't really want to know. Just that I'm okay with that being outside of my knowledge. But there was a danger of them connecting to some kind of dark spirits that they didn't need to connect with if they got away from the centralized worship of the temple. So, okay, that's all I know about that. Now, so you could imagine skipping from verse 14 to verse 18, right? So they went up to the city, saw Samuel, got down to verse 18. Then Saul approached Samuel in the gate and said, right? The story flows right on. But we don't understand the story if we don't have 15 through 17. Because what 15 through 17 does is this is the peek behind the curtain, right? This is the thing that makes all of this make sense. Why in the world do we have a story about Saul, the son of Kish, searching for donkeys through the Ephraimite hills? Because, verse 15, the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed to Samuel. Here's what's going on in verses 1 through 14. This is what this story is really about. This guy may be looking for donkeys, but God is doing something else with this. Verse 18. Tomorrow, about this time, I will send to you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him to be prince over my people Israel. He shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines, for I have seen my people, because their cry has come to me. When Samuel saw Saul, the Lord told him, here is the man of whom I spoke to you. He it is who shall restrain my people. So, what's at work in the lost donkeys? God is bringing him there, right? What we have a word for this whole kind of work. What is that? Providence, right? Anything miraculous here? No. I actually bet that Kish was real mad at some stable boy for not closing the gate, right? From a human perspective, right? From a verses 1 through 14 point of view, this is just an ordinary day, right? This is just the normal comings and goings of human existence. But with a verses 15 through 17 perspective, this is God at work in the world. Now, I just want to make a point there. We don't always have verses 15 through 17 revelations about what's going on in our lives, right? I may talk about this on Sunday. I will talk about this on Sunday, Lord willing, because it's Wednesday. This is the sermon I have ready. So, unless something cataclysmic happens. Okay, verses 15 through 17 give us an understanding of what God can, sometimes does, and may be up to in the ordinary comings and goings of human existence. Now, we don't always get as much information as Samuel got. We don't get any information in direct. But it is not out of the question, obviously, that God could use ordinary events to bring about His purposes. And that's what's happening, even though Saul has no idea about it. And God is able to work all things together for good. And in this case, to His ultimate purposes of giving Israel a king. Now, why does God say He is giving Israel a king?
Because their cry has come up to me.
Because their cry has come up to me. Now, what does that remind you of? Any instances where you remember that kind of language? Israel in the Egyptian bondage? And what did you say? Okay, yeah, the burning bush. God says, I have seen their affliction. I have heard their cry. It's come up to me, and I'm going to send you to rescue. I think also maybe this kind of reminds us of the cycle in the Judges, right? He has said, and I don't know that there's ever a passage where he says explicitly, maybe there is and I've just missed it, where he says, I've heard their affliction, heard their cry. But basically that's what's happening in the book of the Judges. Now, what had Israel just done in chapter 8 to God? Rejected Him. Said, we don't want God to be our king. Now, they didn't think they were saying that, but that's what they were saying. And God told them that's what they were saying, right? God told Samuel to tell them, this is not a good idea. And they said, no, we will have a king, right? Just spit in the face of the advice that God, through Samuel, gave them. But even in their rejection of Him, God is still compassionate and merciful and watchful to the needs and the concerns of His people. God is full of loving kindness, steadfast love, and mercy, patience towards His people. His primary disposition towards them is love and enduring faithfulness, even in the face of their rejection, which I think is a powerful testimony about who God is and what He's all about. And so we get this perspective in verses 15 through 17. This is not just an ordinary day. This is a day where God is acting on behalf of on behalf of His compassion for the sake of His people. All right, anything through verse 17? Yes, Austin.
Maybe a couple things. First of all, them rejecting Him as king is nothing new.
That's right.
I mean, they've been doing it for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
But then secondly, you're talking about like, why does He place Saul as king? One reason is because He hears their cry. But another reason is, and He says, is to restrain
Yeah,
them.
that's a good
And
point.
I think that's interesting, especially coming out of the period of the Judges, where it's like, they're not restraining themselves, right? And so He's giving them someone, even though Saul, and we'll see this, it's not, maybe in some ways you say the ideal candidate. He is someone that can rein in some things.
Yeah.
And restrain.
I agree. And I wonder, it seems to me at the beginning that there are a number of notable positive characteristics about Saul. That I think God has given him a real shot. Like, I think he really could be the king that would restrain them in all the best ways. I don't think God puts him behind the eight ball. I think he gives him all the possibilities here. So yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah,
In chapter 2, in verse 3, you have the ESV.
I do. Yes, sir.
Can you read that?
Yes, sir. Just a second.
And so while you're getting to it, remember go back to chapter 1 about Hannah. And the Lord closed her womb.
Yeah.
If you start right there and all the way through the book of Samuel, start writing down what the Lord is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, this is another instance what the Lord is doing here, placing this with the donkeys. It's all coming to Samuel. But all the way through, you will be amazed at what the Lord's doing. And if you put yourself in those people's position, you wouldn't understand.
Right.
They're not reading this, right? They're acting out this in their lives, so they don't know it. So it is providence.
Mm-hmm.
So when you read Hannah's dissertation here in verse 3, how does you read?
Yeah, talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed.
Yeah, his actions are calculated.
That's
He's
right.
going behind it. We don't know.
Very good.
And so I always like to use that verse that Hannah didn't know why the Lord closed her womb.
Yeah.
You know, all the way through Samuel, you're going to see this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All the way through. If you just write down every chapter, what the Lord is doing, you'll be amazed when you finish saying what you've learned.
Yeah, that's right. If anybody is unaware, the younger classes are talking about the fall of the walls of Jericho. So that's what's going on back there.
And each one of them are demolishing on a different day.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
that's
They rebuild
true.
it and then
That's
destroy it. So it's
I'm gonna go back to that.
Yes.
Restraint for a minute.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
You think by terminology there, you think that by the establishment of the United Kingdom, does this buy Israel time from captivity? Do you think they were on that path to ultimately
Yeah.
seeing that before they did?
Yeah, it's brutal at the end of Judges, right? I mean, just absolutely horrific. And one of the key things is there was no king in Israel. And I think maybe the emphasis there is on a divine king, but a good human king would have fixed a lot of that. Like David reigns in a lot of that. The righteous kings, Asa and Hezekiah and Josiah that come along, reign in a lot of that. So maybe in some ways it is a positive look at the kingship. And I think that basically even about governments that are not godly generally do have the effect of restraining the worst excesses of evil, right? So even maybe not the most ungodly governments, right? The most ungodly governments would encourage that. But in general, governments have the role of reining in and restraining evil even when they are not perfectly by God's design. I think there's probably a sense in which Saul restrained him, right? Talks about him going through and getting rid of witchcraft and all that, which makes it so ironic that he turns to that at some point. But he's not a good guy. He's ultimately not the king God wants. But he has had an effect of driving out some of these dark things from Israel. So I think you're right there that perhaps the United Kingdom having this central authority figure, and certainly if the king is what God wants him to be, it would have that effect, and God would give him.
It does provide a rallying effect.
That's right.
People
Yes.
rally around.
Well, and we can do just a comparative study, right? We can look at the northern kingdom of Israel and with their awful kings, and they are in captivity very quickly, even though God made promises to Jeroboam that sound a whole lot like promises he made to David. And then the southern kingdom, we have a few good kings where the text tells us at certain times, like God waited because of their faithfulness. So
See, the other side of it too is that we've seen all the way up to this point in the past. God's even took evil kingdoms to bring judgment on the righteous, and he's also took evil kingdoms that actually did his will, even though they thought that they were doing what they wanted to do for their kingdom, but God's will of what he wanted to transpire over what lands they took and all that, they actually done God's will, even though they didn't know that he was still in control of it.
that's right. And that's another example of providence, right? We would look at the rise and fall of Assyria, or the rise and fall of Babylon, and we would say that's the ordinary comings and goings of human existence. God says, no, as me wielding the tool of judgment and then judging them when they get out of control or whatever it may be. All right, we need to move forward just a bit. So let's say here, 18 and following, I'm going to we're going to work our way real quickly through the end of chapter 9 and then go to chapter 10. Okay. So basically, Samuel says, I am the seer, I'm the prophet. The donkeys, don't worry about them, they've been found. And he says, and for whom is all that is desirable in Israel? Is it not for you and for all your father's house? Basically, I think Samuel's indicating here, there's something much more precious in store for you and your family. And Saul says, me? Am I not a Benjaminite from the least of the tribes of Israel? Why might it be the case that Benjamin is the least of the tribes of Israel? They were almost wiped out, and I don't know exactly how long before, but it probably wasn't that long before. And his clan was the humblest of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin. That may be a little bit of, maybe not false humility, but just kind of self-deprecation. His father seemed to be a pretty notable person, a mighty man of valor, I think he's called. But basically, you see a lot of Gideon in Saul, like, I'm not the one you're looking for here. And but anyway, Samuel brings Saul in, and there is a feast prepared with 30 young men. And here is Saul and his young men. And he brings them in, these 30 people who've been invited. And Saul is given the choice portion. And so he sleeps that night. The next day, they're going to go out on their way. And they send the servant ahead. And this is the key here. Verse 10. Tell the servant to pass on before us. And when he has passed on, stop here for a little while, that I may make known to you the word of God. Now we come to the beginning of chapter 10. And I'm just going to put this on the screen real quick. There is a little bit of a translation question. So if you have the ESV, you'll have this is verse 1. If you have something like the New King James, this is verse 1. I think the New American Standard would have something like this, probably King James. What happens is that there's the Septuagint, which was the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. You all know it, but the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament has this line here. And there are some people who think that this might be the original reading because the Septuagint as a translation is older than any of the Hebrew copies we have. So for the most part, your Bibles are translated straight from the Hebrew. But there are a few places where there are questions that sometimes certain translations will say, I think the Septuagint helps us here. I don't know if it does or not, but I just want to put that out to you. So if you're reading it in different translations, you'll see a little bit of a difference. Basically, the point is the same. The New King James says, is it not because the Lord has anointed you commander over his inheritance? This one, Samuel says, has not the Lord anointed you to be prince or commander over his people Israel? And you shall reign over the people of the Lord, and you will save them from the hand of their surrounding enemies. And this shall be the sign to you that the Lord has anointed you to be prince or prince over his heritage. So you can see that basically the main point of this is the same, but the ESV has the longer reading that comes from the Septuagint, which is that Greek translation. Okay, you want to carry us through any of the next part?
So we're in 10:1.
10:1 if you want to take 10:1.
Okay. Then Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it on his head and kissed him and said, is it not because of the Lord has anointed you commander over his inheritance? When you have departed from me today, you will find 2 men by Rachel's tomb in the territory of Benjamin at Zilzah, and they will say to you, the donkeys which you went to look for have been found, and now your father has ceased caring about the donkeys and is worrying about you, saying, what shall I do about my son? Then you shall go on forward from there and come to a terebinth tree of Tabor. There 3 men going up to God at Bethel will meet you, one carrying 3 young goats, another carrying 3 loaves of bread, and another carrying a skin of wine. And they will greet you and give you 2 loaves of bread, which you shall receive from their hand. After that you shall come to the hill of God, where the Philistine garrison is, and it will happen when you have come there to the city that you will meet a group of prophets coming down from the high place with a stringed instrument, a tambourine, a flute, and a harp before them, and they will be prophesying, saying, the Spirit of the Lord, then the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you, and you will prophesy with them, and be turned into another man. And let it be, when these signs come to you, that you do as the occasion demands. For God is with you. You shall go down before me to Gilgal, and surely I will come down to you to offer burnt offerings and make sacrifices of peace offerings. 7 days you shall wait till I come to you and show you what you should do. So here in this section, let's see, let me find my place in my notes. So Samuel, he tells him these things ahead of time, right? He says, these things are going to happen. The very specific things. You're going to meet 3 men, and they're going to have 3 young goats and 3 loaves of bread and a skin, and they will greet you and give you 2 of the loaves. He doesn't say they're going to give them all 3. He's very specific in what he tells him. And some of that is to confirm, like, this is real. Like, I'm not playing a joke. I'm not just saying, I think you should be king. This is, God is saying, you are going to be the king of Israel. And so in him telling this and this coming to pass, it's going to confirm for Saul that he is going to be the king of Israel. And and then it mentions that that his heart is going to be changed. I think that's probably similar to our heart being changed when we're baptized into Christ. And maybe more so, like maybe he's aided in how his heart has changed more than we are, because he has direct revelation from God, but he still has the choice whether he wants to follow that or not. And I think that is very important for us as well as him, that he still makes the choice whether he wants to follow God or not.
Yeah, the Spirit may have given him some divine help in that. But I like the way that verse 9 says that when he turned his back to leave Samuel, God gave him another heart. Maybe changed his perspective, gave him a different, and we don't know all the ways in which that happens, maybe through Samuel speaking to him in his revelation. I think that's typically how God does that. But then you see in verse 9 that all these signs came to pass that day. So he doesn't give us the blow-by-blow of all that happening, except for the last one, the group of prophets coming. And the Spirit rushes on him, and he starts prophesying, and the people who are around say, what has come over the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets? I think that's basically like it became a saying, right? Verse 12 says it became a saying. I think it's like a sign of a marvel without an explanation. Like we would say, wonders never cease. And whenever they saw something that was just unbelievable, they would say, is Saul even among the prophets? Like it was something that was, you couldn't explain it. And a man of the place answered, and who is their father? I think that's a saying. I think that was a way to say, well, just because Saul's dad wasn't a prophet doesn't mean that God can't grab a hold of him. Basically, it was a way to say, just because he doesn't have the heritage of a prophet doesn't mean that he couldn't be a prophet. And so I like this when we come to verses 14 and through 16. He comes back home, and Saul's uncle asks him, where'd you go? He says, to find the donkeys. And he said, I had to go find Samuel to ask him about it. And he says, well, what did Samuel say? Well, that's kind of a long story, right? And he says that the donkeys were okay. Period. That's it. He doesn't say anything else about it. He doesn't give him any more information. So his uncle does not know that his nephew, maybe this was like one of those uncles that might try to get his hands on power or something. So Saul says nothing about him going to be king. But really, there's only a very few people that know anything about this. Samuel, the servant, was sent on ahead. Now, he might have some suspicion when Saul comes back soaking wet with oil. Like, what in the world went on back there? But when he comes back, but he doesn't know anything specifically. So it's basically Samuel and Saul that know what's going on here. And so maybe Israel's in the dark. Now, in verses 17 and following, we're kind of running out of time. 17 and following, there is going to be a public demonstration of Saul as king. I think what's happening here is it needs to be indicated clearly that this was not just Samuel picking somebody on his own, but that this was God's choice. So the way to do that is to make it a random selection, but to trust basically that through this procedure that God is going to reveal his will. We've seen this before in the Old Testament. Now, I don't think we can roll dice and figure out God's will today. So, but they had the expectation, especially with Samuel as a prophet here, that this would be the means by which God would reveal his will. So they draw lots. Now, I want to look at verse 19 for just a second. Verse 18 and 19. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I brought up Israel out of Egypt. And I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of all the kingdoms that were oppressing you. Look at verse 19. But today you have rejected your God who saves you from all your calamities and distresses, and you have said to him, set a king over us. Now therefore present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and by your thousands. So Samuel creates this great gathering, and he says, I want you to understand what's going on here before we move any further. Right? That this idea of you getting a king, this is not really an occasion to celebrate. Maybe in a certain circumstance it would have been, but not with your attitude. Right? And so Samuel kind of clears the air here and says, you need to understand what's really going on. The reason we're doing this is because you didn't want God to be king over you. So then they go through the lot process. Do you have anything on that you would like to say?
I don't think so.
Okay. So they go through the lot process. It comes down that it's Saul, so it goes to Benjamin, then it goes to the clan of the Matrites, then it goes down to Saul specifically. And I think this is God's public demonstration of this is my choice for the king. And they're, okay, Saul, you've been chosen, you're the king, yay. And where is he?
Hiding.
He's hiding, right? Hiding among the baggage. This is not really just a real encouraging start for the king. Now, I will say this. I'm not sure how we're supposed to take this. I don't know if this is supposed to be like, what a wimp, or if this is supposed to be Saul still saying, I'm not sure you got the right man for the job, in kind of a humble sort of way.
So it's either cowardice or humble.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm kind of endeared by the fact that here's a man that's better looking and bigger than everybody else, who is still like, I'm not sure that this is the role I need to be in. I think early on there are some indications about Saul that we have reason to expect positive things from him, and I think this may kind of go along with that. But then they go and get him, right? Basically, they're forcing him to make him king, and Samuel shows him to the people. You see him, the Lord has chosen. There is none like him among all the people. The people shouted, long live the king. I think there's general exuberance. I think there's acceptance. I think they look at Saul and they see, they don't know evidently one thing about him, but they see him and they say, that looks like a king. Well, we'll see.
At the time that he was picked, God seen his heart, even though he hid himself.
Yeah.
And God's looking at him, that Saul was somebody humble, that he was going to do what he wanted him to do at this point.
Yeah, maybe so. I think he certainly has that opportunity on the table.
Yeah.
So then we come to the end. Samuel told all the people the rights and duties of the kingship. I think probably Samuel's reviewing Deuteronomy 17, 14 through 20 with it, right? Your job is not to make a bunch of alliances by marrying a bunch of foreign women. Your job is not to be collecting a bunch of war horses from Egypt. Your job is not to be gathering a whole bunch of wealth in order to establish your kingdom. Your job is to make a copy of the law, meditate on it day and night, and lead the people as an example in faithfulness. I read a... Go ahead.
Does yours say that Samuel explained it to Saul, or does it say that he explained
told the people
the behavior for it?
Yeah.
So, and maybe I'm wrong, but I had the idea of when you were talking about at the beginning of class, take. Take. He's going to take this. He's going to take that. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but that was my thoughts on it when I was reading.
Yeah, that's probably right. It's probably a combination of both, and
his
so
responsibility.
what he's responsible for.
Okay.
One commentary that I read said this: Israel's king is not really a king; he's a vice king. He is himself under the law of Yahweh, Israel's true king. So he's only a king inasmuch as he listens to God. And you see that when Samuel says, you wait until I come and then I'll tell you what to do. Well, in what world does the prophet tell the king what to do? He's the king in God's world. In God's world, where the prophet speaks for God, The prophet tells the king what to do, not the other way around. And then there are some men of valor that are behind Saul. And then in verse 27, there's some worthless fellows that say, how can this man save us? So they rejected not only God, right? They wanted a king, but they reject the king that God chose too. And that may be a common thing. All right. So Lord willing, Sunday night, we'll look at chapter 11 and 12. Chapter 11 and 12. And that'll be well worth our time. So thank you very much. Very good.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.